call it self-sabotage, but Freud called it something darker: the death drive. That silent executioner, living in your chest, turning every victory into ash before you can taste it. You've felt it in the 3 a.m. hours, haven't you? When success feels like betrayal of who you think you are. When happiness feels like a lie your soul refuses to tell. Tonight, we descend into the coldest truth psychology ever discovered. The reason you destroy what you build. The reason pain feels more honest than peace. The reason you are both the king and the assassin in your own story. This isn't about fixing yourself. This is about understanding the war that's been raging inside you since birth. You were born with an assassin at your side. Not flesh and bone, but a presence silent as a shadow cast across winter stone. This isn't a fairy tale or a therapy session. It's the first law: every man enters the world with darkness stitched into his skin. A wolf curled beneath his ribs, waiting for the right scent of weakness or victory. You've felt him. He's the whisper behind your calmest nights, the chill in your bloodstream when life tastes too sweet, the silent hand pulling you back from the edge of real change. You mistake this shadow for self-doubt, for anxiety, for the scars you carry from yesterday's battles. Freud called it thanatos, the death drive. Not the urge to die, but the quiet machinery orchestrating your collapse, your retreat, your sabotage. You weren't dropped into this world defenseless. You arrived armored, by pain, by shame, by the built-in urge to stay small, cold, unchanging. There's a war raging inside every man ambitious enough to rise. The battle is never between you and the world. It is always between you and that ancient sentinel. The part that flinches at light, claws at hope, bites the hand that tries to raise you up. Some call it resistance, but that word is thin as paper. This is deeper. This is strategic. The assassin doesn't want your life. Not yet. He wants the throne you've only dreamed of. He would rather see you starve than kneel to the possibility of transformation. You feel it most in the moments when calm should reign. You win something: respect, affection, recognition, and rather than savor it, you feel the old frost closing in. The wolf stirs. The assassin sharpens his blade. You sabotage the victory before joy can stain you. You push away what could redeem you. You burn down the bridges you spent years building. But this isn't random. It's efficient. It's genius in its brutality. The death drive is the master strategist of your unconscious mind. He understands that change is annihilation. To become more is in his eyes to die. The man who seeks power is the enemy of the boy who learned to survive through silence, withdrawal, absence. The assassin is no common saboteur. He is the architect of your comfort zone, the jailer of your identity, the gatekeeper of your pain. Why do you choose winter over spring? Why do you find peace only in storms? Why do you feel more alive in exile than in celebration? The answers cut deeper than any advice, any motivational speech, any soothing voice. They are forged in the cold. The assassin wants you loyal to your own suffering. He rewards you when you return to numbness. Rusty chains, but familiar. Freedom terrifies him. Ambition disgusts him. Above all, he fears the man you could become if you ever outgrew your scars. There's no cure for this war. There is only mastery. The strategist learns not by running, not by shouting, but by sitting in the dark and counting the blades, listening to the wolf's breath at midnight, studying the maps where every self-inflicted wound was planned with surgical precision. Self-sabotage is not a mistake. It's a move. Every retreat, every collapse, every act of regression is a cold calculation. You bleed in places the world never sees, but every drop leaves a pattern. The death drive collects these patterns and erects walls around your potential. Are you the architect of your own prison or the engineer of your freedom? The world will not answer. No lover, no mentor, no father, no friend. Only you and the assassin at dawn. Only you and the hunger for power that terrifies and seduces you. Only you and the quiet knowledge that every excuse, every moment of self-pity, every act of sabotage was a pledge. A pledge to remain unchanged, untested, unbeaten by joy. Some men will spend their lives hating the assassin, wishing for deliverance. Others will try to kill him. only to find he is made of wounds too deep to cauterize. But the warrior who learns to study his enemy, to respect the precision of his darkness, will see what wiser men always see. The death drive is the only teacher bold enough to reveal your true shape. He protects your old kingdoms while demanding the price of your new ones. You were born with an assassin. He will walk with you until you decide to master the art of war within. When the fire burns away everything soft and sentimental. When the silence grows heavier than any hope. When the night is long and the steel in your mind is sharpened by your own pain. Then, and only then, will you see the shape of the cage, the purpose of its builder, the cost of every day spent loyal to smallness. The assassin isn't your fate. He's your test. The difference between exile and throne is measured in how deeply you are willing to know him. Your first wound is the hand that built him. Your last scar is the key to his defeat. Remember, there is a part of you that would rather die than change. But there is another part, icy and silent, whose only mission is to survive the assassin, master his ways, and claim the power hidden in the darkness. There's a moment that every man recognizes, but few will admit. The moment when everything you've fought for finally aligns. The job offer arrives. The woman you've wanted says yes. The recognition you've craved lands in your lap, like a crown you never thought you deserved. And instead of triumph, instead of the satisfaction you've rehearsed in 1,000 midnight fantasies, something cold floods your chest, something that tastes like metal and feels like betrayal. Victory becomes poison in your mouth. You've been here before, haven't you? Standing at the threshold of everything you claimed you wanted, only to feel like an imposter in your own success. The promotion that should validate years of grinding suddenly feels like a trap. The relationship breakthrough that should heal old wounds instead exposes new ones. The moment of recognition that should crown your efforts instead makes you want to disappear into the shadows where you understand the rules. This isn't weakness. This is strategy. Your unconscious mind, that ancient war council, has been meeting in the dark, deciding your fate while you sleep. And their verdict is clear. Success is the enemy. Growth is betrayal. Becoming more than you are is treason against who you've always been. Listen closely. Your death drive doesn't fear your failures. It feeds on them. Failure confirms the story you've been telling yourself since you were old enough to bleed. Failure says you're right about your limitations, your unworthiness, your place in the hierarchy of men. Failure is comfortable because it requires no evolution, no shedding of skin, no uncomfortable rebirth in the fire of your own potential. But success? Success demands you become a stranger to yourself. Think about the identity you've built in the trenches of your own struggle. The noble underdog, the misunderstood outsider, the man who almost makes it but carries his wounds like medals of honor. Strip away the struggle, the limitation, the familiar taste of defeat, and who remains? Your death drive knows the answer. No one you recognize, no one you know how to be. This is why you sabotage interviews when you're perfectly prepared. Why you pick fights with lovers who see your worth when you can't. Why you disappear when people start believing in you more than you believe in yourself. Your unconscious mind would rather you remain authentically miserable than become successfully unknown. Every act of self-sabotage is a vote for the man you know over the man you could become. Every retreat from success is a pledge of loyalty to your scars. Every moment you choose familiar pain over unfamiliar joy, you're protecting what your death drive considers sacred. The story that keeps you small, manageable, safely contained within the boundaries of who you think you are. But here's what cuts deeper than any blade. You're not protecting yourself from success. You're protecting yourself from the responsibility that success demands. The responsibility to acknowledge that most of your suffering was voluntary, that most of your limitations were self-imposed, that most of your failures were elaborate rituals of avoiding the terrifying possibility of your own greatness. The death drive whispers seductive lies in the language of humility. It tells you that wanting more is arrogant, that success would make you forget where you came from, that your wounds are what make you authentic, your struggle is what makes you deep, your inability to fully win is what keeps you real. And so you learn to flinch at light. You become allergic to your own potential. You develop an immune system that attacks anything that threatens to heal you, elevate you, transform you into someone who might actually deserve what he's always wanted. Watch yourself in the moments when victory tastes like poison. Notice how your body rebels against good news. Feel how your mind scrambles to find problems and solutions, threats and opportunities, reasons to retreat when advancement beckons. This isn't random self-destruction. This is precision engineering. Your unconscious mind has built the perfect machine for keeping you exactly where you are. Some men spend lifetimes wondering why they can't seem to win. They blame luck, timing, other people, the system, the stars. But the warrior who learns to see clearly recognizes a different truth. The enemy was never external. The saboteur was never them. The assassin was always you. The part of you that would rather die than evolve, that would rather suffer than grow, that would rather remain a familiar failure than become an unfamiliar success. Victory will always taste like poison until you develop an appetite for your own transformation, until you're willing to betray the man you've always been for the sake of the man you could become, until you understand that your resistance to success isn't protecting your authenticity, it's protecting your limitations. The question isn't whether you deserve success. The question is whether you're brave enough to become the kind of man who can handle it. Because the crown you've always wanted, it doesn't fit the head that's bowed in defeat. It only fits the skull that's been cracked open by its own potential and rebuilt by its own courage. Success will feel like death until you realize it's actually birth. And birth, as any mother knows, always begins with blood. Prison has its privileges. Ask any lifer about the terror that grips him the night before release. 20 years behind bars, and freedom feels like falling into an abyss. You know this feeling, don't you? The strange comfort that lives in your chains. The way your limitations have become your most trusted companions. The quiet peace that settles over you when you can explain away your failures with familiar wounds. You've built your entire identity around what's wrong with you. Your anxiety isn't a disorder. It's your defining characteristic. Your depression isn't a condition. It's your depth. Your inability to trust isn't damage. It's wisdom. Your fear of success isn't weakness. It's authenticity. Strip these away, and what remains? A question so terrifying that your death drive has spent decades ensuring you never have to answer it. The chains you wear aren't made of iron or steel. They're forged from stories you tell yourself about why you can't, why you shouldn't, why you're not ready, why you're not enough. And the most insidious truth about these chains is this: you polished them until they gleamed. You've made your prison so comfortable, so familiar, so perfectly fitted to your psychological shape that leaving it feels like suicide. Who would you be without your wounds to explain your failures? What would remain if you couldn't blame your past for your present limitations? The death drive knows the answer. A man with no excuses, standing naked before his own potential, responsible for every choice that kept him small. This is why breakthrough terrifies you more than breakdown. Breakdown confirms what you already know about yourself, that you're fragile, that life is hard, that you're not built for victory. But breakthrough demands you become someone new, someone who can't hide behind yesterday's pain or tomorrow's fears, someone who must face the mirror and acknowledge that most of his suffering was voluntary. Most of his limitations were choices. Most of his failures were elaborate ways of avoiding the crushing responsibility of success. The unconscious mind abhors vacuum. It would rather fill your life with familiar suffering than risk the unknown emptiness that comes with genuine fulfillment. Your death drive isn't cruel. It's protective. It's keeping you loyal to the only version of yourself it knows how to manage. Change is death to the identity you've carried like armor through the wars of your own making. This is why therapy makes you feel worse before it makes you feel better. This is why every moment of clarity is followed by a wave of resistance. This is why you find yourself inexplicably drawn to chaos when your life starts feeling too stable, too peaceful, too close to what you've always claimed you wanted. You sabotage not because you hate yourself, but because you love the version of yourself that survives through struggle. The man who overcomes is a stranger. The man who thrives is an imposter. The man who actually gets what he wants. He's a threat to every story you've ever told about why you couldn't have it. Watch how you move through the world. Notice how you collect evidence of your own limitations. See how you interpret neutral events as confirmation of your unworthiness. Feel how you flinch when someone suggests you might be capable of more than you think. This isn't pessimism. This is loyalty. Loyalty to the wounded boy who learned to survive by staying small, by expecting little, by making peace with less. But loyalty to your limitations is treason against your potential. Every day you spend in the prison of your own making is a vote against the man you could become. Every comfortable excuse is a chain you forge with your own hands. Every familiar pain you choose over unfamiliar growth is a betrayal of the future you claim to want. The death drive whispers sweet justifications in the language of wisdom. It tells you that ambition is vanity, that wanting more is greed, that your current struggles are more honest than potential success. It convinces you that your wounds make you deep, that your limitations keep you humble, that your inability to fully win is what keeps you real. And so you remain the loyal subject of your own suffering. You bow to the monarchy of your pain. You serve the kingdom of your limitations with the dedication of a knight, never questioning whether the crown you're protecting is worth the life you're sacrificing to defend it. Some men will spend their entire existence as prisoners of their own psychology, polishing their chains until they shine like metals, telling themselves that their cage is actually freedom, because they hold the key. But the warrior who learns to see clearly recognizes a different truth. The comfort of your chains is the enemy of your crown. Breaking free doesn't require strength. It requires the willingness to betray the man you've always been for the sake of the man you've never dared to become. It requires acknowledging that your prison was never locked from the outside. The door was always open. You were just too loyal to your own suffering to walk through it. Watch a moth circle a flame. Watch it choose death over the darkness that birthed it. You are that moth, and your life is that flame, and every choice you make is another orbit around the same burning truth. You don't want healing. You want mastery over your wounds. You don't seek freedom. You seek control over your chains. You don't crave new experiences. You crave the old ones, played out with different actors on familiar stages, hoping this time you'll win a game that was rigged from the first move. Freud called it repetition compulsion. You call it bad luck. But luck is a lie we tell ourselves when we're too afraid to see the pattern. The pattern that reveals you're not a victim of circumstance. You're an architect of your own familiar hells. Look at your relationships. Really look. The unavailable lover who mirrors the parent who never saw you. The friend who betrays you exactly like the one before. The boss who exploits your loyalty until you break. Just like the last one did. You tell yourself these are coincidences, that you attract wounded people, that you're just unlucky in love and work and friendship. But coincidences don't follow blueprints this precise. Your unconscious mind is a master strategist, and it's been playing the longest game of chess imaginable. Every move you think you're making freely has been calculated 3 steps ahead by the part of you that would rather remain broken than risk becoming whole. Because wholeness is unpredictable. Wholeness is dangerous. Wholeness means you can no longer hide behind the wounds that have defined you since you first learned what it meant to hurt. The death drive doesn't guide you toward random suffering. It guides you toward specific suffering. The kind that confirms what you already believe about yourself. The kind that reinforces the story you've been telling since you were old enough to understand that love comes with conditions. That safety is temporary. That the people who should protect you will eventually leave you to face the wolves alone. But here's the cruel genius of repetition compulsion. You never choose the scenario where you might actually win. You never pick the fight you can finish. Never pursue the love you can keep. Never take the risk that might actually pay off. Your unconscious mind is too clever for that. It knows that victory would shatter the very identity it's spent decades protecting. Instead, it guides you to situations that feel like they might offer redemption, but are actually designed to deliver familiar defeat. The partner who seems different, but carries the same emotional unavailability. The opportunity that promises recognition, but ends in exploitation. The friendship that begins with understanding but deteriorates into the same betrayal you've experienced before. You're not unlucky. You're unconsciously brilliant at recreating the exact conditions that first taught you who you think you are. And every time you recreate these conditions, every time you choose the same type of poison in a different bottle, you're not trying to heal the original wound. You're trying to prove that the wound was justified, that your pain was reasonable, that your defensive strategies were necessary. The boy who learned that love hurts becomes the man who can only feel alive in relationships that confirm this truth. The child who discovered that effort goes unrewarded becomes the adult who sabotages every opportunity to prove that trying is pointless. The young man who learned that trust leads to betrayal becomes the older man who creates the conditions for betrayal to occur, then points to it as evidence of his wisdom. This is the death drive's most sophisticated trap. It doesn't just recreate your trauma, it makes you the author of your own repeated victimization. It turns you into both the playwright and the actor in a drama, where you always know how the story ends, but you perform it anyway, hoping that somehow this time the script will change without you changing the fundamental assumptions that wrote it. Some men spend their entire lives as prisoners of this compulsion, moving from one familiar catastrophe to the next, collecting evidence that the world is cruel, that people are unreliable, that hope is naive. They become connoisseurs of their own suffering, experts in the particular flavor of pain that confirms their deepest fears about themselves and others. But the man who learns to see the pattern, who recognizes his own hand in the architecture of his repeated defeats, who understands that he's not a victim of his circumstances, but their unconscious creator. This man stands at the threshold of a different kind of power. Not the power to avoid suffering, but the power to choose it consciously, strategically, for purposes that serve his growth rather than his stagnation. The question isn't why you keep choosing the same hell. The question is whether you're ready to admit that you've been the devil in your own details, the architect of your own exile, the author of every story that ends with you proving, once again, that you were right to expect so little from a world you've trained to give you exactly what you fear. You don't repeat your traumas by accident. You repeat them by design. Unconscious, sophisticated, precise design that serves the deepest needs of a psyche that would rather be right about its wounds than wrong about its potential. Strip away your job title. Strip away your relationships. Strip away your achievements, your possessions, your carefully curated image of success. Strip away everything external that you use to prove your worth to the world and to yourself. What remains? If you're honest, if you're willing to sit in that cold, empty space without flinching, what remains is a sense of self built around what you lack, what you've lost, what you've never been able to attain. This is the death drive's masterpiece, an identity so dependent on suffering that healing feels like self-annihilation. You've become addicted to your own story of struggle. The noble fighter who never quite wins. The misunderstood genius who never gets recognized. The good man who always gets betrayed. These aren't just narratives you tell others. They're the foundations of who you believe yourself to be. And the death drive, that ancient guardian of your psychological status quo, has convinced you that these wounds aren't obstacles to overcome. They're the most interesting things about you. Without your pain, who are you? Without your limitations to explain your failures, what excuse do you have for not becoming everything you're capable of? Without your wounds to justify your defensive strategies, what reason do you have to remain hidden, protected, safely contained within the boundaries of who you've always been? The death drive whispers seductive lies in the language of authenticity. It tells you that your struggles make you deep, that your inability to fully succeed keeps you humble, that your wounds connect you to something real in a world full of fake victories and shallow achievements. It convinces you that healing would mean becoming ordinary, forgettable, just another person who figured it out and lost what made him special. This is why success often triggers depression in high achievers. This is why happiness can feel hollow to men who've built their identity around overcoming obstacles. This is why some part of you secretly romanticizes your suffering and finds comfort in your limitations. You've learned to wear your scars like medals, to treat your traumas like credentials, to mistake your pain for your purpose. But here's what cuts deeper than any blade. Your wounds aren't your most valuable assets. They're the bars of a prison you've built around your potential. Your struggles don't make you interesting. They make you predictable. Your inability to heal doesn't keep you authentic. It keeps you small. The man who defines himself by what he's survived rather than what he's created becomes a professional victim of his own history. He may achieve, he may succeed, he may even thrive, but beneath every victory lives the fear that without his wounds to explain his journey, he's nothing more than lucky, privileged, or fake. The death drive feeds on this fear, using it to keep him loyal to his pain, devoted to his limitations, faithful to the very forces that prevent him from becoming who he's capable of being. Watch how you introduce yourself to the world. Listen to the stories you tell at parties, in therapy, on dates. Notice how quickly the conversation turns to your struggles, your challenges, your obstacles overcome. Feel how comfortable you become when discussing your wounds, versus how awkward you feel when asked about your victories. This isn't humility. This is addiction. Addiction to the sympathy your suffering generates, to the depth your pain provides, to the identity your wounds create. You've convinced yourself that your scars are your credentials, that your trauma is your truth, that your inability to fully heal is what keeps you real. But authenticity isn't about remaining loyal to your wounds. It's about being brave enough to outgrow them. Depth isn't measured by how much you've suffered. It's measured by how much you've learned from that suffering and applied to your growth. The death drive has sold you the ultimate lie that you are your pain, that your wounds define your worth, that healing would mean losing the only thing about yourself that feels genuine. But pain isn't personality, it's limitation. Trauma isn't identity, it's history. Suffering isn't depth, it's stagnation disguised as profundity. Some men will spend their entire lives as curators of their own suffering, polishing their wounds until they shine like trophies, telling their stories of struggle with the pride of war veterans, never realizing that they've become prisoners of their own tragic narratives. They'll resist healing not because they can't afford the cost, but because they can't afford the loss of the identity that suffering has provided, the depth that trauma has created, the authenticity that wounds have guaranteed. But the warrior who learns to see clearly recognizes a different truth. Your most interesting quality isn't what you've survived, it's what you've built from the ashes. Your greatest asset isn't your ability to endure pain, it's your capacity to transform it into power. Your deepest authenticity doesn't come from remaining loyal to your wounds, it comes from being brave enough to betray them for the sake of who you could become. The question isn't whether your wounds make you interesting. The question is whether you're interesting enough to survive without them. Because the man you could become healed, whole, dangerous with possibility. He doesn't need scars to prove his worth. He carries his power in his presence, not his pain. Your wounds were never your identity. They were just the raw material for building one. There's something you sense about your full potential that terrifies you more than any failure ever could. Deep in the marrow of your bones, beneath all the self-doubt and carefully constructed limitations, you know what you're capable of. You feel it in the moments when pretense falls away, the force you could become, the impact you could have, the way you could reshape not just your own existence, but the gravity of everything around you. The death drive knows this too, and it's terrified. Not terrified of your weakness, terrified of your strength, not afraid of your failure, afraid of your success. Not concerned with your limitations, concerned with what happens when those limitations dissolve and reveal the raw, unfiltered potential that's been hibernating in your chest like a sleeping dragon. Because if you actually became who you're capable of becoming, you'd have to face the most brutal truth of all, that most of your suffering was voluntary, that most of your limitations were self-imposed, that most of your failures were elaborate theatrical performances designed to avoid the overwhelming responsibility of your own greatness. This is the final protection the death drive offers. The illusion that your limitations are imposed from outside, that your failures are evidence of a cruel world rather than evidence of your own unconscious choice to remain small. It would rather keep you safely convinced that you're a victim of circumstances than force you to acknowledge that you've been the architect of your own diminishment. Think about the moments when you felt your full power stirring. The conversations where your mind moves like lightning, cutting through complexity with surgical precision. The challenges where your natural leadership emerges, where others instinctively look to you for direction. The creative moments when something flows through you that feels larger than yourself, more potent than anything you thought you contained. In these moments, you catch a glimpse of what you actually are, beneath the armor of insecurity and self-limitation. And it's not just competent, it's dangerous. Not just capable, it's transformative. Not just sufficient, it's overwhelming in its scope and reach. The death drive recoils from these glimpses like a vampire from sunlight. Because your full potential doesn't just threaten your current identity. It threatens every excuse you've ever made, every story you've told about why you couldn't, every comfortable narrative that's kept you safe from the crushing weight of your own possibility. If you're actually capable of greatness, and some part of you knows you are, then every day you've spent in mediocrity was a choice. Every opportunity you've sabotaged was a decision. Every relationship you've destroyed was a strategy. Every dream you've abandoned was a surrender to the death drive's whispered promise that remaining small is safer than becoming large. The man who accepts his full potential must also accept full responsibility for every year he chose to reject it. He must look in the mirror and acknowledge that his suffering wasn't inflicted upon him. It was cultivated by him. He must admit that his limitations weren't imposed by fate. They were constructed by fear. This is why the death drive fights so viciously against your growth. Not because it wants to hurt you, but because it wants to protect you from the overwhelming burden of knowing that you were always capable of more. That the life you've been living is a fraction of the life you could be living. That the man you've been being is a shadow of the man you could be being. Some part of you already knows you're built for impact, designed for influence, created for a level of success and significance that would make your current struggles seem like childhood games. But knowing this means accepting that every moment you spend hiding from it is a moment of betrayal of your potential, your purpose, your responsibility to become what you're capable of becoming. The death drive would rather you believe that your limitations are real, that your failures are justified, that your current level is your natural ceiling. It would rather you spend your life wondering what if, than risk discovering that the what if was always within your reach, that you were always the key to your own cage, that you were always capable of more than you allowed yourself to become. This is the ultimate fear, not that you might fail, but that you might succeed beyond your wildest imagination, and have to live with the knowledge that you could have accessed this power at any point, that you could have been this version of yourself all along, that every limitation was optional, every excuse was chosen, every small life was voluntary. The question isn't whether you're capable of greatness. The question is whether you're brave enough to stop pretending you're not. Because the man you're afraid to become isn't a stranger. He's who you've always been, waiting in the shadows for you to stop being afraid of your own light. Your potential isn't something you need to develop. It's something you need to stop denying. And the only thing standing between you and it is the part of you that would rather die than discover how dangerous you really are. Here's what they won't tell you about self-sabotage. It's not random destruction. It's precision demolition. Your unconscious mind isn't just breaking things. It's breaking the right things at the right time to maintain the psychological equilibrium that keeps your identity intact. When you sabotage a relationship just as it becomes real, when you quit a job just before the promotion, when you abandon a project just before completion, this isn't weakness. This is surgical precision. Your death drive is a master strategist, and it's been playing the longest game imaginable. While you sleep, it studies your patterns. While you dream, it calculates probabilities. While you plan your future, it's already 3 moves ahead, preparing the exact moment, the precise trigger, the perfect circumstance, to pull you back from the edge of transformation. It knows exactly how much success you can handle before your identity starts to crack. It knows exactly how much love you can accept before you have to fundamentally revise your story about yourself. It knows exactly how much progress you can make before you start becoming someone your unconscious mind doesn't recognize, doesn't trust, doesn't know how to protect. Think about your last major self-sabotage. Remember the timing. You were close, weren't you? Close to something that would have changed everything. The relationship that could have healed old wounds. The opportunity that could have validated years of struggle. The moment of recognition that could have rewritten your entire narrative about what you deserve, what you're capable of, who you really are. And then, as if guided by invisible strings, you found the one thing guaranteed to destroy it. The one argument that would end the relationship. The one mistake that would cost you the opportunity. The one choice that would confirm what you've always suspected about yourself, that you're not built for victory, not designed for happiness, not worthy of the very things you claim to want most. But this wasn't an accident. This wasn't bad timing or poor judgment, or a moment of weakness. This was precision engineering by the most sophisticated part of your psychological machinery. the part that would rather see you fail predictably than succeed unpredictably. The death drive doesn't destroy randomly, it destroys strategically, always preserving the core narrative that keeps you psychologically coherent. It knows that your identity is built on certain assumptions, that you're flawed, that you struggle, that you almost make it but never quite get there. These assumptions aren't just beliefs, they're the load-bearing walls of your entire psychological structure. Remove them, and everything collapses. Not into chaos, but into possibility. And possibility to the death drive is the ultimate threat. Possibility means you could become anyone, achieve anything, transform in ways that would make your current self unrecognizable. Possibility means the end of the story you've been telling about yourself since you first learned what it meant to hurt. So the death drive becomes an architect of strategic failure. It doesn't want to destroy everything, just enough to keep you safely contained within the boundaries of who you think you are. It's not trying to make you miserable. It's trying to keep you manageable. Not broken, but limited. Not defeated, but controlled. Watch how it works. Notice how your biggest self-sabotages come. Not when you're failing, but when you're succeeding. Not when you're down, but when you're rising. Not when you're isolated, but when you're connecting. The death drive doesn't fear your defeats, it feeds on them. What it fears is your victories, because victories have a way of revealing that most of your limitations were optional. Every act of precision demolition serves a purpose. Every perfectly timed self-sabotage protects something the death drive considers sacred. The version of you that it knows how to manage, predict, control. The version that struggles but survives. That tries but doesn't quite succeed. That dreams but doesn't quite achieve. The man who understands this precision doesn't become its victim. He becomes its student. He learns to recognize the patterns, to predict the timing, to see the strategy behind what once felt like mysterious self-destruction. He begins to appreciate the sophistication of his own psychological defenses, even as he prepares to dismantle them. Understanding the precision of your self-sabotage is the first step toward redirecting that same precision toward construction, instead of demolition. The same strategic thinking that once engineered your failures can now architect your victory. The same unconscious intelligence that once kept you small can now expand you beyond your previous limitations. But first, you must respect the enemy. You must acknowledge that your self-sabotage wasn't evidence of your brokenness. It was evidence of your mind's sophisticated systems of self-preservation. The question isn't how to stop the strategy. The question is how to redirect it. Because the mind that's clever enough to destroy exactly what threatens its equilibrium is also clever enough to build exactly what serves its evolution. The same precision that once demolished your dreams can now construct your empire. The difference between self-destruction and self-creation isn't intelligence, it's direction. And direction, unlike intelligence, is a choice you make every morning, when you decide whether to serve your limitations or your potential. Your unconscious mind is a master strategist. The only question is whose war it's fighting, yours or your death drive's. In the space between recognizing your death drive and trying to change it, something profound happens. Silence. Not the empty silence of suppression, but the pregnant silence of awareness. The silence of a predator watching its prey, of a strategist studying the battlefield, of a king surveying his kingdom before deciding which battles are worth fighting. This silence is dangerous, because it changes everything, and nothing simultaneously. You still feel the familiar pull towards self-destruction. You still sense the death drive stirring when success comes too close, when love feels too real, when growth threatens the comfortable boundaries of who you've always been. But now you see it coming. Now you recognize its signature, its timing, its methods. And in that recognition, something shifts that can never shift back. The death drive thrives in darkness, in the unconscious realm where it can operate without your awareness, pulling strings you didn't know existed, orchestrating failures you thought were accidents, engineering retreats you believed were necessary. But consciousness is its kryptonite. The moment you begin to see the patterns clearly, the moment you can predict the sabotage, the moment you understand the psychology behind your own self-destruction, the death drive loses its most powerful weapon, your ignorance. You're no longer the victim of mysterious forces. You're no longer at the mercy of impulses you don't understand. You become the observer of your own psychological weather, watching storms gather on the horizon of your potential, feeling the atmospheric pressure drop when transformation threatens, seeing the lightning before it strikes. This doesn't mean the death drive disappears. Ancient forces don't vanish because you've learned their names. But it does mean they become visible, predictable, manageable. You begin to see the triggers that activate your self-sabotage, the moments when life feels too good, when success tastes too sweet, when happiness threatens to become permanent instead of fleeting. You begin to understand the timing of your collapses. Always when you're closest to breakthrough, never when you're safely mediocre. You begin to recognize the methods of your own destruction, the specific arguments you start, the particular risks you take, the exact words you say to ensure that success slips through your fingers once again. In this silence of observation, you discover something that changes the entire game. Your death drive isn't your enemy. It's your unconscious mind's misguided attempt to protect you from what it perceives as existential threat. Every act of self-sabotage is a confused act of love, a panicked attempt to keep you safe within the boundaries of an identity that no longer serves you but still feels familiar. The death drive sees growth as death, because in a sense it is. The man who heals his wounds is not the same man who carried them. The man who achieves his potential is not the same man who lived beneath it. The man who claims his power is not the same man who hid from it. Growth is a form of death, the death of who you were for the sake of who you could become. But this understanding brings a different kind of power. The power to speak directly to your death drive, to acknowledge its concerns, to negotiate with it like a skilled diplomat, negotiating with a foreign power that has legitimate interests but outdated strategies. In the silence of awareness, you can say, I see you. I understand what you're trying to protect. I know you're afraid that if I change too much, I'll lose something essential about who I am. But what if becoming more doesn't mean becoming less? What if growth doesn't require the death of everything valuable about my current self? This conversation doesn't happen in words. It happens in the deeper language of attention, presence, conscious choice. It happens when you feel the familiar urge to sabotage and pause instead of acting. When you sense the death drive stirring and breathe instead of reacting. When you recognize the pattern and choose a different response. The silence that transforms isn't passive. It's the most active thing you can do. It's the silence of a warrior who has learned to master his own impulses, who can feel the pull of self-destruction and choose construction instead. It's the silence of a strategist who understands that the most important battles are fought not in the external world, but in the internal realm, where every decision either serves your evolution or your stagnation. Some men will spend their entire lives at war with their death drive, fighting an enemy they don't understand, struggling against forces they can't see. But the man who learns to sit in the dangerous silence of awareness discovers something profound. The death drive was never the enemy of his growth. It was the guardian of his safety, protecting him from changes he wasn't ready to make. And when he's finally ready to make them, when he's prepared to honor both his need for growth and his need for security, the death drive stops being an obstacle and becomes an advisor. Not leading him back toward familiar limitation, but helping him navigate the treacherous waters of transformation without losing the essential core of who he is. In the silence that transforms, you don't defeat your death drive, you integrate it. And integration, not elimination, is how boys become men and men become kings. Kings aren't born from comfort. They're forged in the fire of their own contradictions. Your death drive, that assassin you've carried since birth, isn't your weakness. It's your potential crown. Every impulse toward self-destruction contains within it the inverse impulse toward self-creation. Every pattern of sabotage reveals the exact blueprint of your possible success. Every familiar hell you've chosen points toward the unfamiliar heaven you've been avoiding. The man who understands his death drive doesn't become its victim. He becomes its master. He doesn't eliminate self-destructive impulses. He transmutes them. The same precision that once demolished his progress now constructs his empire. The same strategic thinking that once engineered his failures now architects his victory. The same unconscious intelligence that once kept him small now expands him beyond his previous limitations. This is the alchemy that separates kings from subjects, the ability to transform lead into gold, poison into medicine, death drive into life force. Look at the patterns of your self-sabotage and read them like a map. Every relationship you've destroyed shows you exactly how to build one that lasts. Every opportunity you've squandered reveals precisely what you need to succeed. Every moment you've chosen familiar pain over unfamiliar growth points toward the exact transformation that terrifies and calls to you. Your death drive has been your unwitting teacher all along, showing you through negative space what you're truly capable of becoming. It has outlined in shadow every quality you need to develop, every fear you need to face, every limitation you need to transcend. Your self-destruction was never random. It was research, conducted by the part of your psyche that needed to understand exactly how strong you'd have to become to survive your own potential. The same mind that engineered your defeats with surgical precision can engineer your victories with equal sophistication. The same unconscious intelligence that knew exactly when and how to pull you back from success knows exactly when and how to push you toward it. The death drive that once served your stagnation can now serve your evolution, not by disappearing, but by redirecting its considerable talents toward construction instead of demolition. But this transformation requires more than understanding. It requires integration. You must stop seeing your death drive as an enemy to defeat, and start seeing it as an advisor to consult. Every impulse toward self-sabotage becomes intelligence about what you're not ready for. Every urge to retreat becomes information about where you need more preparation. Every moment of resistance becomes a roadmap toward the growth that scares you most. The king doesn't eliminate his war council. He transforms it. He takes the same strategists who once planned his defeats and puts them to work planning his victories. He takes the same intelligence that once protected him from risk and redirects it toward calculated advancement. He takes the same precision that once kept him small and applies it toward becoming dangerously large. This is why your darkest moments were preparation, not punishment. Why your deepest wounds were education, not evidence of your brokenness. Why your most sophisticated self-sabotage was training for the most sophisticated self-mastery. The death drive was never trying to destroy you. It was trying to prepare you for the level of power that would have destroyed you if you'd accessed it too early. Now, in full awareness, your death drive becomes your most valuable advisor. It shows you exactly where your identity is too small, exactly where your story needs updating, exactly where your potential demands expansion. It reveals the precise moments when growth threatens your psychological equilibrium and gives you the opportunity to choose expansion over contraction consciously, strategically, with full understanding of what you're trading and why. The crown you wear isn't built despite your darkness. It's built from your darkness, transformed. Every impulse towards self-destruction becomes raw material for self-creation. Every pattern of limitation becomes a blueprint for liberation. Every familiar defeat becomes the foundation for unfamiliar victory. Some men spend their lives fighting their shadow, trying to eliminate what can only be integrated. Others surrender to it completely, becoming victims of forces they never learned to master. But the man who learns to see his death drive as neither enemy nor master, but as the most sophisticated part of his psychological machinery, this man discovers something profound. He discovers that he was never broken. He was always powerful. The same forces that once worked against him were always capable of working for him. The same precision that once engineered his failures was always capable of engineering his success. The same intelligence that once kept him safely small was always capable of making him dangerously large. Your self-destruction was never the problem. Your unconsciousness of it was the problem. Your death drive was never the enemy of your growth. It was the guardian of your readiness, making sure you developed the strength to handle the power you were always meant to claim. The question was never whether you were worthy of the crown. The question was whether you were strong enough to wear it without it crushing you. Your death drive spent years making sure the answer would be yes. And now, with that same precision, turn toward your elevation instead of your limitation. With that same intelligence serving your expansion instead of your contraction. With that same power flowing toward your potential instead of your stagnation. Now you understand what you always were beneath the careful management of your own unconscious wisdom. Not a man who destroys himself, but a king who was being forged in the fires of his own contradictions, tempered by his own resistance, crowned by his own darkness, transformed into light. There will come a moment when the war inside you quiets, not the false peace of suppression or the temporary peace of exhaustion, but the dangerous peace of integration. When you've made allies of your demons, when you've learned to speak the language of your death drive, when you've transformed your most destructive impulses into your most creative forces. This peace is dangerous because it makes you unpredictable to a world that expects you to remain at war with yourself. The man who has integrated his shadow moves differently through the world. He doesn't carry the desperate energy of someone trying to prove his worth or hide his flaws. He doesn't radiate the anxiety of someone fighting invisible battles or the exhaustion of someone perpetually at war with his own nature. He carries something far more unsettling to those who profit from your inner conflict. The quiet confidence of someone who knows exactly who he is, including the parts of himself that others would rather pretend don't exist. This dangerous peace makes you immune to the emotional manipulation that once controlled you. The guilt trips that used to redirect your energy toward other people's agendas bounce off you like arrows off armor. The shame campaigns designed to keep you small and manageable lose their power when launched against someone who has already made peace with his darkness. The fear tactics that once paralyzed you become irrelevant when wielded against someone who has stared into his own abyss and emerged stronger. You stop being interesting to people who are addicted to drama. You stop being useful to systems that profit from your suffering. You stop being available for the psychological games that once defined your relationships. The dangerous peace of integration makes you a poor target for those who feed on chaos, confusion, and internal conflict. This isn't the peace of the enlightened sage who has transcended human nature. This is the peace of the warrior who has conquered his own nature without destroying it. The sage floats above the battlefield. The integrated man owns it. The sage seeks to eliminate desire. The integrated man learns to direct it. The sage retreats from the world. The integrated man engages with it from a position of unshakable internal authority. In this dangerous peace, you stop explaining yourself to people who wouldn't understand even if you drew them a map. You stop justifying your choices to those who lack the courage to make their own. You stop seeking approval from those who have never approved of themselves. The need for external validation dies when you've achieved internal integration. But this peace is most dangerous to you, not because it threatens your safety, but because it threatens your excuses. When you're no longer at war with yourself, you can no longer blame your failures on internal conflict. When you've mastered your death drive, you can no longer excuse your mediocrity by pointing to self-sabotage. When you've integrated your shadow, you can no longer hide behind the story that you're too broken, too damaged, too conflicted to claim your power. The dangerous peace of integration makes you responsible for your destiny in ways that can no longer be denied or avoided. Every choice becomes conscious. Every action becomes intentional. Every outcome becomes a reflection of your true priorities rather than your unconscious patterns. Some men will resist this peace more fiercely than they ever resisted their pain. Pain, at least, provided excuses. Conflict, at least, justified inaction. The war within, at least, explained why they couldn't access their full potential. But peace? Peace demands performance. Integration demands integrity. Wholeness demands that you become accountable for the gap between who you are and who you're capable of being. In this dangerous peace, you discover that you were never the victim of your circumstances. You were always their author. You were never at the mercy of forces beyond your control. You were always the one choosing which forces to serve. You were never too weak to change. You were always too afraid of what change would demand of you. The dangerous peace reveals that every limitation was optional. Every excuse was chosen, every small life was voluntary. And while this revelation can be devastating to the ego that built its identity around struggle and suffering, it's liberating to the soul that was always designed for dominance. This isn't the peace of someone who has given up the fight. It's the peace of someone who has won the only fight that ever mattered. The fight against the parts of himself that would rather die than evolve, that would rather remain familiar than become powerful, that would rather stay safe than become dangerous. When you achieve this dangerous peace, you stop being a man who might succeed despite his demons and become a man who succeeds because of them. You stop being someone who overcomes his darkness and becomes someone who is empowered by it. You stop fighting the war within and start winning the war without. The world needs men who have made this dangerous peace. Not because they're perfect, but because they're whole. Not because they lack darkness, but because they've learned to wield it. Not because they've transcended their human nature, but because they've mastered it. Comment forged if you've felt the fire that transforms boys into kings. If you've learned to see the death drive not as enemy but as architect. If you understand that your greatest power was always hidden inside your greatest wound. Because the most dangerous thing in this world isn't a man at war with himself. It's a man who has made peace with all of who he is, and decided to claim all of what he's capable of becoming.